We were born before the wind, and also younger than the sun. There the bonnet boat was one, who sailed in the mystic. Hark now, hear the sailors cry, smell the sea and feel the sky, and let your soul and spirit fly into the mystic. And when that foghorn blows, I'll be coming home. And when that foghorn blows, I wanna hear it. I don't wanna have to fear it, no, no. I wanna rock your gypsy soul way back like in the days of old. Magnificently we will float into the mystic. And when that foghorn blows, I'll be coming home. When that foghorn blows, feel it. We were born before the wind, and also younger than the sun. There the bonnie boat was one, to sail in the mystic. Hark now. Whew. Namaste, everyone. Thought I'd do a little panel on mysticism today. I don't know why. Just sort of like mysticism. It's like the great misunderstood thing, right? Most people think it's like one thing. But it's like when you get into it, it's like so many different kinds, right? It's why there's so many different kinds of yoga, so many different religions and practices and rituals, and you name it, right? Everyone's different. Everyone has different balance of molecules. And I thought that today the theme would be steam. Like, what? Steam as like this incredible agent of purification, this incredible agent of melting the sticky stuff. You ever tried to take a stamp off an envelope, right? You kind of like steam the thing, right? The heat, the air, the water goes in and just kind of like melts the sticky, right? So that's kind of the agenda for spiritual practice. We want to melt the sticky stuff, right? The whatever, the crud, the funk, the ning-nang from other people, from our own confusion, from whatever we might have eaten. It's like created some funk zone in our microbiome. So I thought I'd kind of sort out some of these different categories of mysticism, and we'll meditate and maybe feel like, what's your angle, right? Because everyone's different. So obviously love seems to be the predominant mystical investment, right? If you go deep into the love, it's kind of like, wow, right? That's kind of the ultimate goal. But not everyone feels a lot of love. You kind of need to be spilling over with it to really give it continuously. But as we know, going deep into the deep I am self does something magical. Except if you say that to some folks, they're like, there's no deep self. What are you talking about? It's all like, you're just a bunch of molecules. So that's another paradigm, right? There's this kind of purely material perspective of reality that doesn't really give much space for mysticism. Nonetheless, let's breathe through the nose and kind of make a distinction between maybe the most basic dichotomy is the unitive version versus the isolative. And what does that mean? Meaning the isolative mysticism is probably the oldest, actually. Because if you look at the Indian scriptures, which are like thousands and thousands of years old, you got to go back to Samkhya Yoga to get the really first expounding of like what's going on in meditation. And what they're trying to say is that you are not this world, right? You're not the mind, you're not all this stuff. You're the Purusha, right? And that's kind of what we do on a fairly regular basis, is to go into the deep self and kind of observe the static stuff. That's a radical separation in the ancient way of thinking of it, because you're really separating out the pure self from all this crud. Now, if you go to a yoga class nowadays, they'll tell you with great sort of gleeful joy, like, oh, yoga means unity, right? And they're not wrong, right? The root yuj does have to do with yoking. But the original mystical perception is not merging in that way. Actually, it's radical separation. So I thought I'd make that point straight. Because sometimes you have to extricate yourself from funky stuff, right? You don't want to merge into that stuff. And then there's unitive, which is this kind of interconnectedness feeling where you just kind of like, everything is good, everything is part of the play. There's nothing problematic, actually. I mean, you might not like some stuff, but it's what it is, right? So this unity experience, well, both are the same ultimately, right? In terms of your inner experience, it becomes a kind of stillness where, whether you're doing radical separation or merger, you're not thinking at that point, right? You're in a kind of samadhi. It's called nirvikalpa samadhi or savikalpa samadhi. Or if you like to do what a lot of, say, Buddhist monks do, or just maybe generally enlightened people, is they walk around in sahaj samadhi, which is that they're in a state of stillness, and yet everything is dynamic and it's zipping all around, and tennis balls are flying all over or whatever, but Djokovic is... So there's that, right? There's like holding this space for the great swirly whirl of all things. So let's just do that for a minute. Just like anchoring, feeling the earth, noticing your body. Consciousness takes a while to kind of acclimate when you drop inside. It's like going into a movie theater, it's dark. So we're just acclimating. And as we're waiting for things to clear, it's good to mention, you could call it annihilation mysticism. It's actually probably more Buddhist than anything. Because that's the actual definition of nirvana. Right? It means nirvana, meaning to blow out. So if you're in some kind of state of nirvana, whatever that means, you're like, nobody home, right? At that point, you're just like, woohoo! So we get down to this debate between like, what exactly is emptiness? And there's so many misunderstandings, takes on that. I like to compare it to what quantum physicists call the 0 point place. It's not even a place, right? This 0 point out of which time and space arise. And from this point of view, the universe is constantly creating itself, right? It just is what it is, and creation just keeps arising with every thought, right? With every ripple. And in Sanskrit, it's called spanda. It's a great word that has to do with throb, right? And you can kind of feel the throb in the waveforms when you're just being, right? It's like there's a pulse to things. So we're going to drop into the spanda. Respond to this spanda. The spanda is, it's like the fluctuations in the vacuum. Out of the 0 point plaza, there's this continuous negentropy, right? As time and space kind of rise up and get sucked back in. Right? It's this very interesting dynamic going on. And if you're caught up in the external earthquake of it all, it can be kind of deadly. But if you're anchored in the home station, deep down observation deck, it's like the eye of the hurricane. A lot of swirly whirly, but you got it. So there it is. We're just holding the space for the center. So all the different varieties of relating cascade and move through you and around you, and whatever your particular superpower is. Maybe it's patience and you're able to just sit quietly. Maybe it's that you're kind of this ecstatic person and that sitting quietly gives you the opportunity for all this ecstasy to sort of come up. So we're breathing. Just let it all quiet down. Just noticing that whatever might be going on, like a good snapshot of this event called you. Might as well relax the eyeballs and jaw, neck and shoulders. Beautiful breath. The ocean of consciousness. these different kinds of mysticism. So many different kinds. And yet it all comes back to the experience of the divine, or however you translate that. If we're thinking the Supreme I Am Self wants to show up as you, that's what's happening. Which is quite a tribute to you, right? If you're thinking, oh, I'm just this person. It's like, no. The entire galaxy decided to show up as you. Like, whoa. Let's just relish that one. Some folks, they want to have some special kind of experience. Otherwise, they don't think they meditated. Or, I didn't see any lights. I didn't no Kundalini. Okay. But when this Kundalini has done her job right, it's really still, right? You're not necessarily going to be full of like vibrational explosions. That may be at the beginning when the Shakti and there's Kundalini sort of busting through your impurities. But after a while, we get to this, it's like stabilizes. And it's like, you don't need anything, right? You don't need any special lights or, I mean, you might want that to sort of say, wow, this is for real. This is, this isn't just talk. But I believe that if you properly just sit quietly and really relish what is, it's like, wow. The whole thing is mysticism, right? Just because we're caught up in duality on the surface. It's like, because at least I found in my own dropping really deep, is when you come back out, it really becomes a lot more obvious that it's all perfect. It might not seem perfect, but it's perfectly unfolding the way it should. You have to come to that conclusion oneself, right? Someone can't just, that's the way it is, It's like, okay. But, hey, it's awesome. So just basking in the miraculousness. Sort of made some lists of all the different kinds of these different versions of mysticism. So we have ecstatic mysticism, right? Sufi dancing, hip-hop dancing. Maybe if you're in the right zone, it's all mystical. Visionary, right? Some people see cool stuff and get visions of the future or different kinds of revelations of saints and visitations, and it's all real as far as I'm concerned. I've had different things happen to me that are like, whoa, that's not explainable through the normal channels. Unitive mysticism is interesting because it can go both ways. Like, if you drink alcohol a lot, you could have a mystical experience. It's one of the 5 M's, right? It's Madhu, Maita. It's like all these different ways to experience Tantra, right? To experience the oneness, and you can have a cosmic experience drinking, right? Especially with tequila, plant stuff. But then you can also, sort of mess up your brains and have a soggy experience that is less than desirable So I would put the alcohol as the least profound tool. I mean, it does what it does, but for the long term, it's like, it's not really the path, I don't believe, right? It just kills you, over time. Whereas other forms of intoxication, plant medicine-based phenomenon, seem to heal people in unusual ways. I'm sure it also has some kind of toxic effect, depending on what it is and how much. And so the unitive, right? You can merge into the great, you can merge into the great. Okay, collective mysticism is big, right? People go to church, people get in groups, people do rituals together because there's something about the collective power, like in the sense what we're doing here, right? When we're all doing it together, right? It's more powerful. We talked about the nihilative, like wiping everything out, mysticism, like nirvana. That's a kind of alcoholic experience too. You could put that in that category. There's the ordinary life is Tao perspective. And that's to say that there's nothing that's not mystical, because there's nothing really solid. And it's all different rates of vibration governed by the unseen hand. So it's as mystical as anything else, whether you're tying your shoelaces or whatever you're doing. There's, you could say, Kundalini mysticism, which is the same mysticism, right? But you're invoking really powerful forces and guiding them through your biology, right? Which then expands your glands and expands your consciousness. And so what did we leave out? Well, there's other categories that are less about the process and more about how it fits into the world. So you could say Gnostic mysticism, or like the Essenes around the time of Jesus were doing kind of a non-dual thing, having personal revelation and, merging into the heart, right? They found ways to do that. Sufi mysticism is very much that. It has a little bit of the nihilative in there too, with the fana, with this, like, you just merge, right? A lot of these mystical situations were always dealing with the exoteric people, like the police, the people that would come and arrest you for, doing mystical things. I think there was some lady in Saudi Arabia that got the death penalty for creating a homeopathic color, putting vibrations in different colored water. So they I guess found that to be enough of a witchcraft to do away with her. But so these certain exoteric religions do not like the esoteric at all. That has to remain hidden, which is why Gnosticism could have stayed off in the caves. And oftentimes the Sufi mysticism, the poetry is all about getting drunk, which is just code for God, so they could get away with it. Theosophical mysticism, the Theosophists brought together a lot of different wisdom traditions and kind of put it all into a bundle. And some of those folks were amazing. Annie Besant, they used sort of these yogic technologies to come up with atomic elements that they hadn't even discovered yet in the scientific world, right? They discovered quarks and an element that's somewhere in between hydrogen and lithium. So, yes, theosophical mysticism involves the direct experience of the divine, but with a kind of personal package, right, of your particular juicy flavors that work for you. And then last but not least, there's several more categories. Devotional mysticism. It's the one I've gravitated to in my life because I always felt the love thing that was like leading me, right? It's like, oh, so chanting, devotion to saints kind of energy is powerful, right? It purifies you, it lifts you up, opens your heart. There's many kinds of yoga that are involved with this, like the Bhakti yoga tradition, which pretty much emerges out of the 13th century in India. Before that, you have much more of a mental, philosophical approach to the infinite. So you're into the contemplative, the Vedantic, philosophical. And there's people that are just in their head, but they can attain the mystical through just pure intellect, right? Somehow they're bypassing the heart, and it's just like raw recognition. They just get it, right? It's like realization. Good stuff. And then the one that, even though maybe it's not the one I practice the most, maybe it's the one I practice more now, call it nature mysticism. So it has this basis in animism, in recognizing that the natural world is God, kind of a la Van Gogh. My favorite example of that, when I lived in Japan, and you go to the Shinto shrines, there's not a cross of Jesus, there's no Buddha, it's a mirror. And I think that's the coolest altar of all, right? We thought it was so cool 10 years ago that I've never been to Burning Man actually, but I helped create this poem that was used in this sort of situation they're calling the God box. And they would put people through all these rituals, and then they'd go in and take a look inside the box. And since they're not doing it anymore, I can tell you, it was a mirror. And people had some pretty profound experiences, right? Because they weren't expecting that. But self-reflecting universe. In Sanskrit, bimba pratibimba, right? Palace of mirrors. Just don't bring in a barking dog. Okay, so we're just got a couple minutes left. Let's just like merge into the merge. Nothing like sound vibration to do it. Your ears are 3 times more wired than your eyes to connect you to the deepness. When you're in utero, you can't see much. Your taste and smell are clogged. You can feel vibration and you can hear stuff, right? You can hear Dad down the hall. So it makes sense that one of the most direct mystical paths is through sound vibration, right? Through entrainment in that, right? The swirling sound that absorbs the mind, clears the Varieties, they're called, right? These agitations. So all in all, ultimately, all of these practices are there to purify your mind. So it can be this clear transparency into the infinite. And also you can arrive at sort of mind over matter technologies. So let's say for this final minute, we're just going to bask in the glow. Thank you, Deanna. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, everyone, for just showing up here. Tells me that you're respecting what we're doing, and it's deep. Spent my whole life arriving in this kind of place to share and hopefully travel with everyone in the deepness and in the light, so that we can help carry our brothers and sisters who are struggling with the dark of the night. Hari Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. Nice nice relaxed brains dropping into the chest. So whatever your personal mythology might be, you're guaranteed to have a highly unique experience when you dive into the God box. Beautiful breath. One final thought. Where the sound disappears into the great ethers, if your mind is surfing the sound, you just merge into the ethers when it fades into it. Namaste, namaste. See you on Thursday.